Hello. I'm making this video because several people have reached out to me asking for advice on how to work on their Crossland CC1 and specifically how to rebuild their steam valve assembly. And so I have developed some unintentional expertise on this, having had to repair my own machine. And I thought I'd make a quick video summarizing what I've learned. So in your machine, of course, you will not have this steam valve on its own. It'll be installed on top of the boiler. And so this portion right here, this is what's centered on the boiler. You have the valve body here. This will have, of course, hoses connected to it. And then you have, this is the limit switch. And this thing right here, this is a limit switch collar. This is, of course, the knob that is pressed onto the machine. So this is what's protruding from the right side of the machine, and it's pressed on to this stem. So in order to rebuild the steam valve, you'll want to get probably the rebuild kit. And I'm going to assume there's really two ways of rebuilding the steam valve. The cheaper way is to get the rebuild kit. And then you take this thing apart and use the parts from the rebuild kit to repair what you already have. So that's what I'm going to cover. The other option, and if you mess up, you may find yourself having to go this route, is to replace the entire assembly or at least more of the assembly. And that often requires getting the boiler open. So it's a more involved repair procedure. So what you're going to want to do to work on this valve is there's really two things. You're going to want to, first off, you're going to need to get into here. So this is where the actual valve lives, in between these sections. The other thing is this valve stem has seals on it, O-rings, which you may need to replace. And so I'll quickly show you both of those. And you may not do it in the order that I'm about to describe. It may be that in order to get this thing out of your machine, you want to first work on the valve stem and then work on the part over here. Yeah, it's really your choice in sort of how to sequence working on it. So what you'll want to do is disconnect the hoses from here and here. Now, this one is usually it depends, the type of hose or pipe you have depends on your machine. You may have a different fitting depending on the version that you have. I think probably the hardest version to work on is some of them have a brass pipe instead of a Teflon tube here. And I think that's actually probably better if you have that, because these Teflon tubes are prone to, these are like the high pressure, this is the high pressure steam line going to the thermoblock, which in your machine, the thermoblock is sitting like right here. I think the brass is more resilient. I had, my steam line rupture, which is, why I had to start this whole process in the first place. But if you do have a brass pipe here, I've never had to work on that myself, but you may find that it's hard to do what I'm about to show you without the brass pipe hitting the boiler. I guess you'd have to see if that is a real problem, and if you can't rotate the valve without the brass pipe hitting the boiler, you might have to take apart the boiler. But that won't apply. That's only if you have a brass pipe here. If you have Teflon hoses, then it's just a matter of disconnecting the hoses. So then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to rotate this valve body lefty-loosey. And in my case, you know, there's a couple variants of this. There's this hexagonal version, which I have. And so with that, I can actually just get a wrench onto the valve body. You may have a circular valve body, in which case you might want to use like two wrenches in opposition. So put a wrench here and a wrench here, and and counter rotate them, or you might be able to use one of these heftier nipples as a point of leverage to get this thing to rotate. Now I'm going to rotate it by hand because I broke this thing, so it's easy for me to do that. You'll probably need some leverage to get it started moving. So you're going to want to again go lefty loosey, and you're going to separate these two parts. So now we have the valve body off from this part, which again would be sitting on top of your boiler. Now, if you would just crack this open, what you would see inside is a couple things. You would basically find in here a spring sitting on top of this this valve block. And if you got the rebuild kit, you're going to have a new valve block, but basically you're going to drop in the new valve block. And so the valve block goes with the rubber seal portion of this. Sorry, I realized that's out of the frame of the camera. The rubber seal is facing down into the valve body, and then the spring is going on top of the little metal prong there, and then you're going to want to put probably a few good wraps of Teflon tape. If you get ordinary Teflon tape, it's probably too wide. I used an X-Acto knife to cut Teflon tape to a smaller width. And then you're going to, when you put this back together, you're going to tighten this on. Now, one thing to be very careful about, this is where I made a mistake. I over-tightened this, and I actually sheared off the threads on this portion. And so at that point, I had to crack open the boiler, and it was and get a new part. If you need new parts, I'll put a link to where you can get those, but hopefully that doesn't apply to you. So you'll want to get some Teflon tape or some other sort of food-safe sealant. I like Teflon tape because I know it's food-safe. And with that block, so with the new block and the spring in place, you'll tighten this back on, and being very careful to stop as soon as you're meeting resistance. If these threads are buried, if you can't see the threads anymore here, you're done. Like, stop. Do not go another revolution, because you'll shear off the threads and the whole thing will be useless. Okay, so that's replacing the seal itself. Now the other bit is to work on the O-rings that are on the valve stem. And so to do that, there's a few ways you can go about doing this. My philosophy is I don't worry too much about getting the limit switch position. So at some point you're gonna have to calibrate this limit switch, but it's pretty easy to do. So I don't worry too much about memorizing exactly where this collar is or was. I'm just gonna get the right size hex key and loosen up this collar, and slide it off. Okay, it's off. And I'll show you at the end of this, like how to calibrate it. Now, this is a place you can really get into trouble, because this piece here is threaded the opposite of how you would expect. So this is a righty loosey. So you're going to want to get a wrench on here. It's kind of tough to do because of the limit switch bracket. So holding the valve body in place, you want to rotate this collar not to the left, but to the right, like so. Okay, so now we broke it loose. So I can go ahead and now just use my fingers to loosen it. So yeah, this is a really easy part to mess up, because if you rotate that to the left, it'll just break, and then you're in trouble. Okay. So you want to turn this clockwise in order to loosen it. It's also threaded, the opposite of how you'd expect. So now we have the valve stem separated. Okay, so here are now all the pieces all laid out. What you want to do with the valve stem is, so first off, you can look at the condition of your O-rings. If the O-rings are in good shape already, you may not need to use new ones from the rebuild kit. If they're not, and in that case, you might just want to lubricate them. If they are not in good shape, then you'll need to get the rings off, put the new ones on. That is a pain to do. You just need to be very patient and like gently stretch and roll the O-rings onto this using a lubricant. Like, it's almost impossible, I found, if you don't have a lubricant. A good lubricant to use is this. It's Molykote 111. You can buy it online in these little pillow packs for a few bucks. I like it because it is totally food safe. And you can get probably another silicone lubricant and it'll work fine, but I wasn't able to find one that was that seemed to have as reliable of a food safety rating as this Molykote stuff, so that's what I use. Now, you don't necessarily need to know how this whole thing works in order to rebuild it. I mean, basically, you just need to change out, the key things are to change out this block, the valve block that's included in the rebuild kit, change out these two O-rings and lubricate them, changing it out if it's needed, and then reverse your steps and put the things together. However, it may be helpful to you to understand how this thing works. There's another good video on how that works. I'll put a link to it, but I'll also try to quickly cover it here. So basically what's happening is, so this valve stem, right? Again, it's threaded opposite of how you would expect. So when we turn it counterclockwise, it's tightening. So the way this thing works is there's a sharp point on the end of that valve stem, and I'll pull it back out so you can see. So yeah, I don't know if you can see this here. There's this pokey sharp point on the top of it, and that sharp point is pressed up right into the middle of this screw on the valve block. So when I drop this valve block in and I put the spring on top of it, and when it gets all reassembled, so that spring is held under tension, what's happening is when the valve stem isn't screwed all the way in, this spring is pushing that rubber seal closed. It's forming a seal inside this. When I tighten the valve stem all the way in, I'm actually pushing the block out of the way. That pokey bit is pushing the block this direction, and that's creating a path for steam to travel from your thermoblock in here through the valve out into the steam wand. And so that's basically what's going on inside the valve. And you can actually see this. You can see how this works if you put something inside the. So I have like a little piece of a plastic drinking straw. So here I have the valve totally shut. So in other words, this is not screwed in all the way, and you can see that the drinking straw is basically flush with the end of the valve. And if I tighten this, at some point, you'll see the drinking straw. Here we go. Now the drinking straw is getting pushed out of it ever so slightly, and that's because we pushed the valve block out of the way. And so now if I turn this clockwise, the drinking straw under pressure is able to go back in, the valve is shut again. So that's how this thing works. Now, in terms of calibrating it, you can calibrate it at this point. That is what I did initially. You can use something like a drinking straw, a cut drinking straw section as your guide. I think that's an annoying way to calibrate it, and I'll show you what I recommend that you do instead. So you're going to want to put this thing back together. So you've lubricated the your O-rings on the valve stem. You've lubricated those. You've replaced them as needed. You're going to screw this back in. You've gotten a new block, and you've dropped that in, and you've got your spring loaded in on top, and you've got some Teflon tape, perhaps cut to half width, and you are going to go ahead and tighten this up on, being very careful not to over tighten. Otherwise you're going to need to replace the whole thing. The rule of thumb with this entire machine is do not over tighten. It is very possible to strip any and all of these connections by over tightening it. So if you feel like it's stopped, it's better to just pause there, and you can always go back and tighten again later. So now you're going to want to put the limit switch back on. To do that, you just slide it over here, and you grab this collar, and again, this is lefty tighty. So the opposite of what you might expect. You can get it most of the way by hand. This will not tighten, by the way, if you don't have the valve stem all the way in. So make sure you have the valve stem all the way in. And then you're going to tighten this up. You give it like just an extra little turn with a wrench. You'll probably be doing this with it already in the machine. So now it's on there good and tight. The limit switch can't move. And this is what it should look like. So this top surface of the limit switch bracket is basically aligned with the top surface of the entire valve assembly. All right, the last step we have here is to calibrate the valve and the limit switch. And so at this point, this thing is back inside your machine, right? You've got this set screw collar on here, but it's not tightened up in place yet. You've replaced the valve block, and you've tightened the limit switch bracket back on so it can't turn. And now we just need to figure out what to do with this thing. And so what you're going to do is you're going to use you'll use the knob on the outside of the machine most likely. So you'll put that on, and you'll turn the valve so that it's all the way at the as far counterclockwise, so towards that open position as it wants to go. Do not turn it beyond where it wants to go. You'll wind up damaging or stripping the valve. So once it's all the way at that open position, so this is the position where steam is allowed to flow out from the thermoblock into the valve and back out through to the steam wand through this nipple. And so what we want in that open position is to have the set screw contacting the limit switch arm and pushing it down. So, you won't be able to turn this because it'll be in your machine, but just so you can see that, this is what it looks like from the underside, is this set screw should be pushing down that limit switch. It should be pushing down that limit switch arm, and it should be all the way up against that metal stop. So we'll call this the open position, okay? And what we'll do is we'll initially tighten the set screw in place here, okay? So now the question is, and so as I just tightened it, it's actually, I can feel like as I turn this, like it's a little, I put this set screw, it doesn't quite want to go onto the limit switch arm. Like it's a tiny bit too far this way. So I would loosen it a bit, and I would slide it ever so slightly in the other direction towards the black knob. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. So now it goes smoothly onto the limit switch. So this is your open position. This, where the limit switch is contacting where the set screw is contacting the arm from the other side, and the limit switch is not being pressed down, this is your closed position of the valve. And chances are, if you set the open position by doing what I just showed you, so chances are that you'll wind up pretty close to where you want to be by doing this. Now, the way to test this out is to turn on the machine, and you should start off with the valve in the closed position, okay? So then what you want to do, and of course, this will be plugged into the motherboard on your machine, is you want to rotate this so that it's in the open position, and do this without calling for steam. So don't put your machine in steam mode. Just have it preheating. If you want to be extra safe, you could maybe disconnect the high voltage connections to the boiler. I'm not so sure that's necessary if you're careful. You'll rotate this all the way into the open position, and what you should hear happen is you should hear the pump kick on, and water should start flowing out of the boiler into the thermoblock, through the thermoblock, and into the valve, and out of the valve through the steam wand. So you should have a steady stream of water. So then the question is, if I rotate it over here, the pump will kick off because because we're not pushing down on this. So the question is, at this point, is the valve closed? And to test that, what you can do is you can get a non-conductive item. Do not use what I'm using here. Get like a wooden popsicle stick, and go in, and with the valve in the closed position, go in and push down on the limit switch for a moment and see, does water come through? The pump should kick back on, and see, do you have some water come through the steam wand? If yes, then we need to slightly adjust the set screw, right? So we would loosen the set screw, and we would loosen the set screw, and we would move it ever so slightly. We want to basically turn this knob ever so slightly clockwise towards the closed position, and then tighten that set screw right back up in place. And so you can just do a few mini adjustments like that, and your goal is that when you're in this position, the pump kicks on and water flows freely through the steam wand, and when you're in this position, the pump is not on, and if you trigger the pump by pushing down on the limit switch manually, no water should flow, because the valve is totally shut. And so that's your goal, and you're going to find that calibration is pretty darn close to what you get if you just put the set screw in the open position when this is all the way is fully turned to the counterclockwise position. So I hope this was helpful to you, and that you were able to get your machine up and running. If you have questions, please feel free to post in the comments, and I will try to get back to you. And yeah, if this was helpful for you and you're feeling generous, feel free to buy me a coffee or a beer.